The neighborhood thought it was just a tragic accident. A loyal dog run over during a stormy night. But what they didn't know was that the dog had witnessed something no human dared to admit. And someone had made sure it never barked again. In the quiet suburbs of Kingsbridge, a faithful golden retriever named Bruno was found lifeless near the fence of his owner's backyard. The police closed the case as a hit and run. But when a young girl, mute since childhood, started drawing disturbing images of a shadowy figure and the dog, the case reopened. What Bruno couldn't say in words, the court would soon uncover through silence, science, and shocking evidence. The rain came down hard that night. The wind howled through the narrow streets of Kingsbridge like a warning, shaking window panes and scattering trash cans across driveways. Inside the neatly kept home at the end of the cul-de-sac, the Darrelson family was winding down. Lights dimmed, TV flickering softly in the living room, and the faint smell of chamomile tea hanging in the air. Everything about the scene looked normal. But out back, something was off. Bruno, the family's golden retriever, wasn't scratching at the back door like he usually did before bedtime. A large, gentle dog known to the neighbors as the four-legged guard of Maple Lane. Bruno had a routine. He'd patrol the backyard, chase away the occasional raccoon, bark at passing cats, then return to his spot on the back porch for the night. But that night, there was silence. It wasn't until the following morning, when 7-year-old Lily Darrelson opened the sliding door to pour out Bruno's kibble, that anyone realized something was wrong. Her soft call, "Bruno, breakfast," was met with nothing but the sound of dripping rain. Moments later, her scream broke the morning calm. Bruno's body was found near the corner of the yard, lying in the wet grass beside the wooden fence. His fur was matted, wet, and slightly smeared with dirt. His eyes, wide open, stared at nothing. His side bore the marks of impact, and his hind leg was twisted unnaturally beneath him. Not far away, tire tracks led toward the side gate, where the fence was slightly ajar. The police were called immediately. Officer Jenna Cole, the responding patrolwoman, quickly surveyed the scene. Her notes were brief. Possible vehicle impact, no signs of forced entry, minor fence damage, likely an accident caused by storm conditions and poor visibility. The family was devastated. Bruno had been with them for almost a decade. It must have been a delivery truck or someone turning around, Mr. Darrelson suggested, choking back tears as he gave his statement. The neighbors rallied in support. Flowers and dog biscuits were left by the gate, and sympathetic messages flooded the family's social media accounts. Bruno was buried in the backyard under his favorite maple tree, his collar wrapped gently around the small wooden cross lily made from craft sticks. But not everyone accepted the accident explanation so easily. Across the hedge, in the adjoining backyard, 9-year-old Emma sat on her swing, slowly rocking back and forth. She didn't speak, not since a traumatic incident when she was a toddler, but she watched everything. And something about the way she stared at the Darrelson house that day was unsettling. Her eyes lingered too long on the spot where Bruno had fallen. She glanced at the gate, then at the garage, and then at the ground near the rose bushes. Her mother, Clara, noticed. "Honey, are you okay?" she asked, kneeling beside her daughter. Emma didn't respond, but she picked up a piece of chalk and began drawing on the patio tiles. Back at the Darrelson house, Officer Cole was wrapping up her report. Before leaving, she made one final sweep of the backyard. Something kept bothering her. Something small, but out of place. The tire marks were clear, but not fresh. The mud had hardened slightly, which didn't match with the intensity of the storm just a few hours earlier. And the angle. The gate was on the left side of the yard, but the impact came from the opposite direction. It didn't add up. She looked for security footage. Many homes in Kingsbridge had Ring cameras or backyard surveillance. But when she asked Mr. Darrelson about it, he hesitated. "It shorted out during the storm," he explained. "We haven't been able to retrieve the footage." Cole made a note to follow up later. What truly raised her suspicion, though, came when she knelt beside Bruno's resting place to lay down a flower. The ground around the grave felt uneven, slightly disturbed, more than it should have been for a single burial. She pressed her palm into the dirt and felt a strange firmness, just a few inches deeper than expected. But without a warrant, she couldn't go any further. Back across the yard, Emma continued drawing. This time, she sketched something different. Not with chalk, but with colored pencils. A large dog lying on its side, a dark red streak near its belly. Behind it, a man's silhouette holding a shovel. And next to the man, something small and square, a shirt? She handed the drawing to her mother, then pointed toward the Darrelson yard. Clara, confused and a little alarmed, folded the picture into her purse and stared at her daughter for a long moment. In her gut, she felt what Officer Cole had begun to suspect. This wasn't just about a dead dog. This was about what the dog had seen, and what someone had done to make sure it would never be able to tell. It had been 2 days since Bruno's burial, and the mood in Kingsbridge was unusually tense for such a quiet neighborhood. The Darrelsons kept their heads down. Mr. Darrelson called in sick to work, and his wife canceled Lily's weekend sleepover. No one in the house said it out loud, but there was a subtle, heavy air of watchfulness, as if everyone was waiting for something to be discovered, or worse, uncovered. Next door, little Emma hadn't spoken a single word. She never did. At 9 years old, she was known for her silence and for the intense, thoughtful way she observed the world. Since witnessing a violent home incident as a toddler, Emma had stopped speaking altogether. Years of therapy hadn't changed that. What she did instead was draw. Her mother, Clara, had become used to interpreting Emma's colorful worlds. Most days it was happy scenes, clouds, trees, butterflies, and the neighbor's golden dog, Bruno. But ever since the night of the storm, Emma's drawings had taken a darker turn. Red scribbles, jagged lines, long shadows. And now, for the 3rd day in a row, she had drawn something unsettling. This one was different. Clara looked at the page. Bruno lay on the ground, exactly as he had been found. A red mark slashed across his side. But behind him stood a figure, a man, tall and faceless, holding what appeared to be a shovel. His hands were covered in red. The drawing had been done in pencil, but the strokes were furious and thick, as if Emma had tried to push emotion through the lead. Clara knelt next to her daughter. "Sweetheart, what's this?" Emma pointed to the dog. Then slowly, with her other hand, she pointed beyond the hedge toward the Darrelson backyard. Clara's heart sank. At first, she told herself it was just a child's overactive imagination. But Emma wasn't the kind of child who invented monsters. She paid attention. She remembered things others missed. And she drew what she saw. By that afternoon, Clara had reached out to her friend Dr. Karen Lee, a psychologist who had once evaluated Emma. She sent her photos of the drawings and explained what had happened in the neighborhood. The dog's death, the storm, the tire tracks. Karen's response was cautious, but clear. This isn't a random image. She's trying to communicate something she believes is true. Maybe something she witnessed. Karen offered to come by the next morning with a forensic art therapist. Meanwhile, across the fence, Officer Cole was still unsettled. She had returned to the Darrelson home under the pretext of retrieving a copy of the now-corrupted camera footage. When Mr. Darrelson handed her a flash drive, she noted how his hands shook slightly. He was pale, distracted, and barely made eye contact. "Mr. Darrelson," she asked casually, "you mentioned Bruno usually slept on the back porch. Any idea why he might have been near the gate that night?" He hesitated. "Maybe chasing something," he said. "A raccoon. He hated raccoons." "Did he bark much?" "Only when something was wrong." She nodded and left, but she wasn't convinced. Later that day, Karen and the therapist, Amelia Ross, arrived at Clara's home. Emma met them with cautious eyes, but didn't shrink away. Amelia laid out paper and pastel colors on the patio table and asked Emma simple yes or no questions, using gestures and flashcards. "Did you see what happened to Bruno?" Emma nodded. "Was it an accident?" Emma looked away. "Was there a person there?" Emma reached for the red crayon. She began to draw again, this time slower, more deliberate. A yard, a dog, a man, a shovel, and now something new, a square-shaped object with what looked like buttons on it. Amelia asked, "What is this?" Emma pointed to her own shirt, then mimed wiping something on it. Blood. Karen looked at Clara. She saw someone bury something. Maybe not just the dog. By the time they took the drawings to Officer Cole, things moved quickly. A forensic sketch artist reviewed Emma's images and overlaid them with potential backyard angles. The police acquired a limited warrant to examine the area Emma had repeatedly pointed to. The garden bed beneath the Darrelsons' roses. The dig was short and shocking, wrapped tightly in plastic and buried under a layer of fresh soil. They found a blood-stained flannel shirt. The pattern matched what the Darrelsons said Mr. Darrelson's missing brother, Caleb, had worn the last time he was seen, a week earlier. The shirt tested positive for human blood. DNA analysis would take days, but a trail had begun to form. And Bruno, it turned out, had been digging at that same flower bed in the days before his death. The family had even posted a short video of him in the garden, pawing at the dirt furiously. That video was now evidence. Emma didn't speak. She didn't need to. In the silence of her sketches, she'd done what no adult could. She had shown that Bruno wasn't just a victim. He was a witness, and someone had killed him not because he barked, but because he knew. The neighborhood of Kingsbridge was no stranger to secrets, some old, some well hidden. But in the case of Bruno's death, it seemed that the dog had unknowingly become the keeper of a terrible one. As the investigation into the strange circumstances of the dog's fatal injuries progressed, a chilling realization began to dawn. The dog's death was not just a tragic accident, but a calculated act to conceal something much darker. It all began with the discovery of the flannel shirt buried beneath the roses in the Darrelsons' backyard. The shirt, found to be soaked in human blood, was linked to Caleb Darrelson, the brother of the homeowner, who had been missing for a week. That revelation alone raised alarms. But the questions didn't stop there. The bloodstains on the shirt were too fresh to have been from a mere altercation. They suggested something far more sinister. Officer Cole's team immediately began focusing their investigation on the backyard, where Bruno had been found dead. The area seemed ordinary at first glance. Nothing but the usual grass and flowers that filled every suburban backyard. But the soil in the area where Bruno had been buried felt different, like it had been disturbed recently. The fresh scent of earth clung to the air, and Officer Cole's instincts told her that something important lay beneath the surface. With a search warrant in hand, the police began digging. The digging was slow at first, the earth soft and damp from the heavy rains of the previous night. But when they reached a depth of just under a foot, the soil became packed, almost unnaturally firm. This was no ordinary patch of dirt. Something had been buried here, something that wasn't meant to be found. The ground was cleared away with precision, and as the officers dug further, a chilling object emerged from the earth. A small, plastic-wrapped bundle. The air seemed to freeze in that moment as Officer Cole knelt down, carefully unwrapping the bundle to reveal what was inside. It was a shirt, but not just any shirt. The faded flannel was stained with dark red splotches, a pattern that matched the one Caleb Darrelson had been wearing the last time anyone had seen him. The blood-soaked shirt was handed over to forensics. The DNA matched Caleb's. It was undeniable. Caleb had been here, in this very spot. But what did it mean? It took days for the analysis to come back, but the more they uncovered, the more it became clear. Bruno had not simply been run over by a passing car. The dog had been digging at the exact spot where Caleb's bloodied shirt had been hidden. The more the police reconstructed the timeline, the more they realized that Bruno had been protecting something, or someone. In his final moments, the dog had been desperately trying to uncover the truth that lay buried beneath the roses. The garage, too, would reveal its secrets. Bruno's collar, now recovered, had traces of dirt on it. A GPS tracker, built into the collar to help the Darrelsons keep track of their dog during walks, showed a curious pattern. Between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. on the night of Bruno's death, the collar had been near the backyard, moving toward the very spot where the shirt had been hidden. But what was Bruno digging for? Why had he been so persistent in this particular corner of the yard? The forensic team had a theory. It wasn't just the dog's loyalty to his family that had driven him to dig. Bruno had sensed something dangerous, something buried beneath the roses. It was as though the dog instinctively knew that Caleb's life had been lost in this very space. As the investigation deepened, Officer Cole followed up on Caleb Darrelson's disappearance. It wasn't long before they uncovered disturbing details. Caleb had been in trouble with the law before, known for his involvement in some shady business dealings. But his last few weeks were different. Neighbors reported seeing him in heated arguments with his brother, Greg Darrelson, the homeowner. A pattern of increasingly volatile behavior suggested Caleb had been hiding something, and possibly someone, in the backyard. But what did that mean for Bruno? The dog had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, or so it seemed at first. But as the officers pieced together the clues, it became clear. Bruno hadn't just stumbled upon the buried shirt. He had been trying to uncover something far more dangerous. Caleb's ties to the underground world of drug trafficking, along with his disappearing act, raised further questions. Was it possible that Caleb had been caught in the middle of a deal gone wrong? Had his brother, Greg, been involved in something more sinister than anyone had imagined? The revelation hit like a ton of bricks. Caleb's death, assumed to be a simple case of a bad drug deal, might not have been an accident after all. It was possible that Greg had killed his brother, and to hide the evidence, he'd disposed of the body. The shirt, the blood, and now Bruno's digging behavior, they all pointed to one painful conclusion. Caleb had been murdered, and the dog had been the only one who knew. But the story wasn't over yet. There was more to uncover, much more. As the forensic team continued their work, they began analyzing the soil around the roses for any other hidden objects. What they found was far more shocking than anyone could have anticipated. Under the roses, hidden even deeper in the earth, lay the remains of something else. Something buried much longer ago than Caleb's shirt. The buried remains weren't just human. They were part of a far darker secret, one that spanned back years. And just like Bruno, someone had tried to hide the truth. But the soil always holds secrets, and sooner or later, it will always give them up. The unearthed shirt was only the beginning. What had started as a tragic story of a beloved dog's death was rapidly spiraling into something far more sinister. As the forensic team expanded their dig beneath the roses in the Darrelsons' backyard, they discovered more than blood-stained fabric. What lay deeper in the soil was a decaying truth that no one, especially Greg Darrelson, ever intended to see daylight. It began with the bones. At first, the officers assumed they were from an animal, perhaps a deer or a large dog. But the deeper they went, the clearer the truth became. Human remains, a partial skeleton, femur, pelvis, ribs, all buried with deliberate care, wrapped in tarp and duct tape. Alongside it, remnants of clothing and what appeared to be a locket, rusted and barely intact. DNA results confirmed the chilling suspicion. The remains belonged not to Caleb Darrelson, but to a woman named Marissa Hale, a 27-year-old who had gone missing 4 years earlier, last seen leaving a party on the outskirts of Kingsbridge. Her case had gone cold, but her sudden reappearance, in the dirt beneath Greg Darrelson's rose garden, reopened every wound and every question. Greg could no longer hide behind grief or the convenient narrative of an unfortunate animal accident. Officer Cole was relentless. She returned to the Darrelson home with a team of investigators and a warrant for further search. This time, the tone of her visit was different. She wasn't here to offer condolences. She was here for the truth. Greg's behavior was erratic. The composed, grieving man who had spoken softly about his love for Bruno had vanished. In his place was someone sleep-deprived, irritable, and most notably, scared. When confronted with the discovery of Marissa's remains, Greg's response was calculated but shaky. "I've never heard that name before," he muttered, his voice low. "Are you sure it's not a mistake?" Officer Cole narrowed her eyes. "We don't bury mistakes in rose gardens, Mr. Darrelson." Greg asked for a lawyer, but the pieces were already falling into place. Behind closed doors, interviews with neighbors painted a new picture. Caleb had been staying with Greg on and off for the past year. A strained brotherly relationship, fueled by financial desperation and resentment. They argued often, sometimes loudly enough for neighbors to hear. The week Caleb went missing, there was a particularly violent outburst. One neighbor recalled hearing what sounded like a shovel slamming against something hard, followed by a dog barking. Then a yelp. Bruno had tried to intervene. That much was clear now. But perhaps the most damning testimony came not from a person, but from a piece of tech. A simple GPS tracker. Bruno's collar, once dismissed as a minor detail, now held a treasure trove of information. On the night Caleb went missing, Bruno had circled the backyard obsessively between 11:22 p.m. and 12:45 a.m. The path formed a near-perfect loop, from the rose bushes to the back door and back again. Over and over, the tracker showed brief pauses at irregular intervals, as if the dog had been stopping to sniff or dig. It was what Bruno found that had sealed his fate. When Caleb disappeared, Greg had claimed his brother left after a disagreement and had probably gone off the grid again. But he failed to mention the shirt, the late-night garden work, or the fight overheard by at least 2 neighbors. Greg had gambled on silence. That of his neighbors, his family, and most tragically, his dog. Bruno had always been loyal. He slept at Greg's feet. He greeted him at the door. He obeyed his every command. But when Bruno began clawing at the roses, pawing at the spot where Caleb's bloody shirt was buried, loyalty became a liability. That's when the leash of guilt began to tighten. The evidence now suggested a horrifying sequence. Caleb had been murdered in the backyard, blunt force trauma to the head, the weapon likely a garden spade or shovel. Bruno, alerted by the scuffle or the smell of blood, had come running. When he began to dig, Greg panicked. He waited a day or 2, hoping Bruno would stop. But the dog didn't. He scratched, he barked, and eventually, he uncovered part of the shirt. So Greg silenced him. Not with poison or a quiet euthanizing, but with a violent hit from his own car. The tire tracks, the slightly open gate, the unnatural angle of Bruno's body. It was no accident. It was an execution, one meant to look like misfortune. But the leash had already snapped, figuratively and literally. What Greg failed to account for was the people watching from across the hedge. Emma, the silent witness. Her drawings, her eyes, and the one thing he never imagined would betray him. Bruno's loyalty, stronger than fear, had led him to dig even when it meant danger. He had tried to unearth the truth. Now, the truth was finally seeing daylight. Greg Darrelson was arrested that evening, charged with obstruction of justice and suspicion of second-degree murder in both the case of his brother and the cold case involving Marissa Hale. The community was left stunned. The man they thought they knew, the grieving dog owner, the family man, was now at the center of a growing scandal. Bruno's grave, now remarked with flowers and hand-drawn cards from the children of Kingsbridge, became a symbol of quiet bravery. The dog had known, and in his own way, he had tried to speak. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the benches. Locals from Kingsbridge lined the walls. At the center of it all sat Greg Darrelson, dressed in a dark suit, his expression flat, hands cuffed, eyes sunken. The once respected man was now on trial for 2 counts of second-degree murder. One for his missing brother, Caleb Darrelson, and another linked to the long-forgotten case of Marissa Hale. But there was another name echoing in hushed whispers across the courtroom. Bruno. Though the dog could not testify, his presence loomed over every detail of the trial. His death, once considered tragic then suspicious, had become the linchpin of the prosecution's entire case. Assistant District Attorney Michelle Tarrant stood confidently at the podium. "This isn't just about murder," she began in her opening statement. "This is about betrayal. A betrayal that tried to bury the truth, silence the witnesses, even when that witness had 4 legs and no voice." She turned toward the jury. "But that dog, Bruno, was more honest than the man who owned him. He led us to the truth. And today, that truth stands trial." The prosecution called their first round of witnesses: forensic analysts, detectives, and neighbors. Officer Cole described in precise detail how the investigation unfolded, how the dog's behavior led to the garden, and how, with the help of a mute child's drawings, a terrible truth began to surface. She spoke about the GPS tracker in Bruno's collar, which recorded his late-night movements. The digital path was displayed on a screen for the jury, showing loops between the back door and the rose bushes, on the night Caleb disappeared. Then came the forensic pathologist, who confirmed that the blood on the buried flannel shirt matched Caleb Darrelson's. Although his full remains were never recovered, the blood loss would have been fatal. "There's no way someone could walk away from an injury like that," the doctor said. "It was blunt force trauma. Intentional. Violent." Then, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence as a forensic anthropologist detailed the remains found deeper beneath the roses. The long-missing Marissa Hale. She had been beaten, wrapped in tarp, and buried with chilling precision. The pattern of concealment matched the method used for the shirt, and the physical evidence tied the grave site directly to Greg's property. Next came the emotional testimony of Clara and her daughter, Emma. Emma sat beside her therapist, Amelia Ross. She didn't speak. She never had. But her drawings were presented as evidence. The jury was shown the powerful images: a man, a shovel, a dog, blood, the garden. The final drawing showed a buried object, the square shape identified as a wrapped item, exactly where Caleb's shirt had been found. ADA Terrence stood beside the drawings. "This child," she said, voice rising with controlled intensity, "cannot speak. But she saw what happened. She saw the man who buried the evidence. She saw the dog that tried to stop him. She saw truth, and put it on paper." The defense, in contrast, struggled to poke holes. Greg Darrelson's attorney argued that there was no eyewitness, no video footage, and that the GPS data was circumstantial. He suggested that Caleb may have been involved in something criminal and fled after a confrontation. As for Marissa Hale, the defense tried to argue that there was no direct connection between her and Greg, though phone records showed they had exchanged messages before her disappearance years ago. The weakest point of the defense came when they attempted to explain Bruno's death. "He was old," the attorney said, "wandered out during a storm, tragically struck by a passing car." But Officer Cole rebutted with the tire marks, with the angle of the impact, with the dog's GPS route that showed him returning to the rose garden seconds before his death. And finally, with the fact that no one else was driving that night. Surveillance footage from the nearby gas station showed Greg's vehicle heading home around 12:43 a.m., directly before Bruno was found. The jury watched, listened, took notes, cried, Bruno had become more than a pet. He was the symbol of the story's innocence. The ultimate betrayal wasn't just of human life. It was of loyalty itself. As the prosecution rested, ADA Terrence said one final line that struck the room still. Bruno dug for the truth, and for that, he was killed. But today, we dig for him. The courtroom stood in silence as Judge Helen Marston prepared to deliver her verdict. The weight of the trial, the blood, the lies, the grave beneath the roses, hung heavy in the air like a storm about to break. Greg Darrelson sat motionless at the defendant's table, his lawyer tense at his side. In the gallery, Emma clutched her mother's hand. Her sketchbook rested on her lap, open to the final drawing. Bruno, standing over the garden, eyes locked on something hidden beneath the soil. Judge Marston took a slow breath and began. Over the course of this trial, we have heard testimony not just from people, but from actions, from evidence, from patterns that do not lie. In this courtroom, we do not require words to recognize truth when it is unearthed. Sometimes, the truth comes from silence, and sometimes, from the loyalty of a creature that could not speak. Her voice never wavered. Gregory Darrelson, you stand before this court accused of two grave crimes: the murder of your brother, Caleb Darrelson, and the murder of Marissa Hale. In both cases, you denied involvement. In both cases, you sought to hide your guilt. Not just with lies, but with burial. You relied on time, on silence, on fear, and in the most callous act of all, you relied on the loyalty of a dog, only to destroy that loyalty when it became inconvenient. A pause. Bruno was not a witness in the traditional sense. He did not testify. He did not point a finger, but he acted. He dug. He scratched. He returned again and again to the place where the truth lay hidden. And when his instincts spoke louder than your alibis, you silenced him with your car. You could hear a pin drop. Evidence has overwhelmingly shown your involvement in both deaths. Caleb's blood, your shovel. Marissa's remains, your backyard. Bruno's death, your vehicle. The court finds that your actions were deliberate, calculated, and heartless. She turned her eyes to the jury box, where each juror stared ahead with heavy expressions. The verdict had already been returned. I hereby sentence you, Gregory Darrelson, to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murders of Caleb Darrelson and Marissa Hale. In addition, this court acknowledges the cruel and deliberate killing of Bruno, a sentient being whose loyalty revealed the truth. Though not covered under current animal protection statutes as a capital crime, the court recommends further review of this case as a precedent for recognizing the role of animals as silent witnesses in criminal justice. The gavel struck. Once, the courtroom erupted into soft murmurs. Reporters scribbled. Some in the gallery wept. Greg was led away, his face pale and expressionless. But in that moment, the trial no longer belonged to him. It belonged to Bruno, the dog who could not speak but refused to stay silent. Outside the courthouse, a small memorial had been placed beneath a photo of Bruno. A single rose, a collar, and a handwritten note that read, "Thank you for digging up the truth." And in the garden where it all began, the roses still bloomed. But now, beside them stood a plaque, engraved with words that would not be forgotten. He couldn't speak, but he was heard.